Well, you'll remember, I think 10 days ago it was now, the Reserve Bank said it could not find that President Ramaphosa had contravened the foreign exchange regulations because they said the transaction had not been, to use their word, perfected. In other words, the buffalo had not left the farm even though he had received the money. Today we're told the money was a deposit. Dr. Deon George is the Shadow Minister for Finance for the Democratic Alliance. Dr. George, good afternoon to you. You were in Parliament today watching this. It was a virtual meeting. So now we're told that this money was a deposit. We've had many explanations for Phala Phala. Have we ever been told before it was just a deposit?
Yes, good afternoon. It's very peculiar, actually, that the governor is saying that it was a deposit, because I did ask the governor then, where is the contract? And he did concede that they don't have the contract. And then he went on, as you heard in your clip, about this handwritten note or the so-called invoice then for this money. But the fundamental question is then, if this was some kind of a security payment, then why did it have to be in dollar notes? I mean, it's a lot of effort. There's a lot of risk involved. I mean, obviously, the money got stolen subsequently, so we know that there's a lot of risk. It could be very simply done through a bank guarantee then, if that was, in fact, a security deposit. That is why we asked for the report, because what we want to know is whether the SARB has actually conducted a robust investigation, because the Reserve Bank is fundamental to our financial system. And we've got to make sure that it is acting in the best interests of the country, and it is also acting in a way that ensures its integrity without political interference. So that's why we want the report. If we can't get the report, which is clearly the case, then we're going to have to take this matter to court. So we've already decided to do that. We will take this matter on review, or the decision of the SARB on review, because it doesn't make any sense to us.
So I'm sure that's going to lead to a long court battle, probably 18 months, Dr. George, before we know what the judges will say. But there's another aspect to this, in that the Reserve Bank is, to my count off the top of my head, the third body to release an investigation report, because we had the parliamentary panel, the two judges and an advocate, if I remember correctly. They investigated this, and the President made a submission to them. Then we had the Public Protector, the acting Public Protector, report into Phala Phala. The President made a submission to her as well. Did he say in those submissions that this was a deposit? I've been through those reports. I can't recall off the top of my head that he did say it was a deposit. It would have made sense if he did.
No, to our knowledge, he hasn't said that either. So what the governor said today, or he didn't say it in his report, it was today, that if it was a deposit, well, why wasn't it said before? But the fundamental question is, if it was a deposit, why do you need notes for it then? That does not make any sense. Because if you're going to have a transaction and you're going to have a deposit, then get a bank guarantee. It's very easy, because nobody behaves that way. If you look at any transaction that's happening, it is very unlikely or unusual if somebody's going to take the trouble of bringing a whole pile of dollars across the border at risk, then leaving it somewhere as a deposit of some kind for a while, and then it gets stolen, as it did in this case. That just doesn't make any sense. And that's why we want to know what actually happened. And did the bank actually do a robust investigation? That's what we want to know. Also, the issue is the money was clearly there for longer than 45 days. That is very clearly a contravention of the exchange control regulations. Now, the bank does argue that the transaction was not perfected, it was not completed. But I also asked the question that was not answered, is what does this mean then for money laundering? Because then it's very simple. If somebody then has money to launder, places it somewhere, and then never ever perfects that transaction. So it never gets completed. So how do you ever enforce anything? Now, there is 6.5 of the regulations that talks to not perfecting a transaction, and, if something gets in the way of it, that there is a process to follow there. But we shouldn't have to do that. So this is the president of the country that we're talking about. This is not somebody who does not have access to a bank account. So something is not right, and we can't let it go, because this institution is fundamentally important. if the SARB is not behaving in a sensible and proper way, then we must correct it, because this institution is so vital. Yes, we've heard from SARS, and the committee agreed today that we would get SARS to come to the committee to also explain various things. For example, whether the money was declared when it entered the country. Apparently SARS says that it doesn't have a record of a declaration, but that the president's taxes are all fine. Also, what we don't know is that when this transaction, or this imperfect transaction, actually happened, so here come the dollars, they then a security deposit, how was it then accounted for in the financials of the farm? Was the money ever received, or did it just lie there? That's very sloppy work, and we do not believe that that is how as a businessman like the president would ever act. In fact, nobody would act that way. So something is wrong, and that's why we need to find it out, because we cannot sit back and just accept an explanation that doesn't make any sense. And also, I have known the governor for a very long time. He was particularly agitated today, I thought, when he was answering the questions. Maybe he is in a very difficult position, because he said his scope was very narrow, because that is what the law permits. But I do not believe that this investigation has been robust enough. And saying that, well, we can't issue the report, that's perfectly fine. But then there needs to be another way to explain that this investigation was in fact robust. And that starts really as why this was a so-called deposit. And why would you use dollars for it? And where is the contract? That would be the first question that anybody would ask. And that seems like the SARB didn't ask that question. And that doesn't make any sense. So the court is going to have to review that and ask that question then to the SARB.
There's another issue, Dr. George, and this is a sort of political question. You can respond as you like. The president leads a government which has said he wants to get off the Financial Action Task Force grey list. Key to that as an institution is the South African Reserve Bank. Do you believe, and I suppose I'm giving you a bit of an open goal here, do you believe the president and the Reserve Bank are acting in a way which will get us off the Financial Action Task Force grey list?
Well, no, because, I've said it many times before, even before we were grey-listed, there was the huge risk that we were going to get grey-listed, and we had to do several things. We needed to tighten up our financial regulations, which there was progress on, but fundamentally we needed to look at if there was any problems in terms of money laundering or funding terrorism, etc., that the judicial system or that kind of process would run its course. And that was always the problem. And here we have the same thing. We do have financial regulations, but we don't have enforcement of those regulations. And when something's gone wrong, there doesn't seem to be any investigation. So the fundamental thing is that FATF is watching us very carefully. I'm sure that people out there will know, if they've tried to transfer money across the border, that it's become a lot more difficult to do that. And that's because of the grey listing. So the president's behavior here has not been in South Africa's best interests at all. In fact, I think FATF would be sitting up to say, well, if they can't do this high-profile investigation properly, well, then are they going to do any other one properly?
Dr. Deon George, thank you, the Shadow Finance Minister for the Democratic Alliance.